Help me, my brother, can you lend me a hand as I walk through this land of confusion? If we give to each other, then there's nothing to say. Let's live right for the moment before it slips away.
Hi everyone, I'm Jillian Sidoti and this is Jeffrey Holst, and today we have a super special show. I'm so excited because this man that we're going to have on today is one of my heroes, and he'd probably tell you he shouldn't be my hero because Jesus should be my only hero, but I don't care. He's one of my heroes.
Well, and just so you guys know, Jillian's been talking about this since before we started the show about how she wanted to get this particular gentleman on. And so even though I know very, very little about our guest today, I'm excited because I've heard about him for weeks and weeks and weeks now about how great he is. So you have, if you're listening, you're going to have to a lot of, stuff to fill in. You're going to have to, live up to these big expectations that Jillian and I have for you. But we're going to change the format up just a little bit today. And we're going to, instead of spending about our normal 10 or 15 minutes talking, we're going to just spend like 3 or 4 minutes. So Jillian, how is everything going for you today? Everything's good?
Everything's good. Honestly, I'm just so excited about today, and I want to tell my joke so badly because I picked this joke special for our guest. A nun told me this joke when I was in high school, and that's why I want to tell this joke.
All right, you go. You know what? Why don't we just go right ahead to the jokes? You've been wanting to tell this joke to me for 2 days now, so go ahead, tell me the joke. I'm excited for it.
Probably a terrible joke too, but we're gonna try it anyhow. Okay, so a woman dies in a car crash, and she dies. She goes up to heaven, and she's at the pearly gates, and St. Peter's there, and she frantically says to St. Peter, "I have to see Mother Mary immediately." And he's like, "Calm down, fine, I'll bring you to our Mother Mary." And he brings her to Mother Mary, and she's all distraught. And so she goes to Mother Mary. She goes, "What is it, my child?" And she says, "Oh, well, Mother Mary, I have just adored you my entire life, and I think the world of you, and I just always see you in these paintings holding baby Jesus, and you always just look so sad. And why would you look so sad holding baby Jesus?" And she goes, "To be honest, I wanted a girl."
That's terrible, actually. Although I think my joke is even more terrible because I wanted to stay on theme. I also picked a religious joke. So this is a question style joke because I like question style jokes. So here goes nothing. What time of day was Adam created? A little before Eve.
Okay, yours is worse.
I know. Well, that's sort of the goal, right? Well, listen. Okay, so why don't you tell everyone who our guest is today and why you're excited about it, and then we're going to bring him on.
Okay, so our guest is Reverend Nicky Gumbel, and I'm going to kind of delve into his background a little bit when we get him on the air here. But Reverend Gumbel is the head of the Holy Trinity Brompton, and he sits on the board of all kinds of colleges and religious programs, and he pioneered the Alpha program, which is something I admire so much, and we're going to talk about what the Alpha program means. But he was also a lawyer in a previous life. We're going to talk to him about that as well. And so everybody, our special guest today, Reverend Nicky Gumbel. Hi. Oh, let's take this thing off so we don't look like idiots. All right. So it's not covering my face. Hi, Reverend Gumbel. Thank you so much for joining us.
We have to unmute him, though. All right. Sorry about that. So you're still muted.
Oh, okay. That's better. Hi, Gillian. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi. So
Nice to
thank
see
you
you.
so much for coming here. Now, we really wanted to talk to you today because, our audience is a lot of, people who have done well professionally in their careers, and they're always looking for more in life. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was because you left a career in law to follow this path of being a priest. But really, Reverend Gumbel, is there a higher calling than being an attorney?
Yes, we need to know because Jillian and I are both attorneys.
Are you both are you barristers or solicitors?
Yeah.
Are you barristers?
In America, it's attorneys, but yes.
You're court lawyer, you're trial lawyers.
Yeah, so I actually don't practice law at all. I used to do bankruptcy work.
Okay.
I did a little bit of trial work before that, but I'm very happy not practicing law, as Jillian knows. And Jillian is she does securities law, so she deals with fancy stuff like that. So
but enough about us. We want to talk about you. I mean, honestly,
more interesting.
you went against the grain. And you decided to stop being a lawyer, but also, were you raised Jewish? I know your father was Jewish. He left Germany. Tell us about that.
My father was a secular German Jew, and a lot of his family died in concentration camps, but he came to the UK, and he was disbarred in Germany. So he was a barrister in Germany. He was a lawyer in Germany, but he was stopped from practicing by the Nazis in 1933, and he'd already qualified as a barrister in this country, my mother was also a barrister. They met they were on opposite sides of a case, and that's how they met. But that was after the war. My father was in the British Army during the war. He started as a private in 1942, and he was a colonel by 1945, working in intelligence, interrogating Nazi officers. So then after the war, he met my mother. They were married. He was 49 when he got married. My mother was 36, and they had two children, me and my sister. My sister's a QC. I don't know whether you know what that is in the US, but at Queen's Counsel, that's like the senior lawyers. So my father was a lawyer, my mother's a lawyer, my sister's a lawyer. Two of my children qualified as lawyers. My grandfathers on both sides were lawyers. My uncle was a lawyer. If we'd had a cat, it would definitely been a lawyer. It was like everybody's a lawyer.
So you're the black sheep of the family, then?
Well, no, I did practice as a lawyer for nearly 10 years. I trained as I read law at read law at Cambridge and theology at Oxford. So my first degree was a law at Cambridge, and then I did my bar exams. I qualified as a barrister, and then I practiced law for about total. I did law for nearly 10 years, and then. But when I was 18, so I was an atheist growing up. Neither of my parents went to church. My father wasn't a practicing Jew. He was an agnostic. So I was an atheist growing up. But when I was 18, my first year at Cambridge, I read the New Testament. And it was through that it was like, as I was reading the New Testament, it was if the person I was reading about emerged from the pages of the New Testament. Wow. And I encountered Jesus, and that changed my life. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it in all its fullness. And that's what I experienced. I experienced life in all its fullness. And so I wanted other people to know that. So that's, I guess, what I spent the rest of my life doing since I was 18.
That's amazing. Like I hadn't heard this before. I mean, I read your Wikipedia page, but that's, sort of high view, right? Overview. Man, I grew up in a Christian tradition. So like, I never had this, first I can't really say this is the day that I came upon the New Testament, right? Like I was hearing Bible stories when I was a child, and I think there's a huge advantage to having that, but there's also something really special, I think, about coming to it with an adult mind. A lot of people are very resistant to that kind of change when they're 18, but you accepted it at 18. And I think, I mean, I guess it might be different when you were at Cambridge, but I assume Cambridge isn't a particularly religious institution these days.
No, it's not. But I mean, it was the last thing that I expected to happen to me. I was so antagonistic towards faith. I was such an argumentative atheist. So
but did you have such did you have any resistance from your family when you said to them, I am, and let me actually put some context into it. There were I did your Bible in the Year program.
Okay.
That's how I got to know who you are.
It took her 3 years, but she did get it done. So
that's pretty good.
It took me 3 years to do. But I got so used to hearing you and Pippa's voice. I used to walk my dogs at night in the dark, and I knew exactly how far I could walk because that's how long your devotional was. And but there were 2 devotionals that spoke to me, and one devotional that was in particular was when you talked about a particular time. It was either you were trying to get into Bible college or you were trying to make this transition and you got resistance. I imagine you had a lot of different resistance. Did you have resistance from your family?
Yeah, I think it was very hard for my parents, to be honest. I think my father's greatest fear was that I wouldn't practice as I wouldn't continue to be a lawyer. I think that was his biggest worry, because in his mind that was the only career that you could do. It was like so I think he was more worried that I in fact, by the time I got ordained, he'd already died. But I think that was his biggest fear. So I think that was, and also he was a very secular, he was an agnostic and had no real, although he had been baptized in Germany because all the Jews were most of the Jews were baptized because they thought that would be a way to escape the concentration camps. But of course, it didn't help at all. But I think that wasn't because of his faith. It was because it was that was what they did.
Right.
So, but my mother, I mean, she eventually came right round. I mean, she was very involved in the church, and she became really one of the leaders in our church by the end of her life.
That's fantastic.
So, which would have been, she died like 12 years after that experience. My father died only 7 years afterwards, and I think more had happened than he admitted to me. I think talking to his sister after he died, I think there was more going on in his heart than he ever let on. I think he didn't want to give me any encouragement.
Oh, that's unfortunate. But I mean, it's nice that you have that and know that in your heart. Now, I want to, so you made this transition, you become a priest and you go on. Did you ever have any moments of doubt?
Yeah. I mean, you cannot have faith without doubt. It's impossible to have faith without doubt. 2 + 2 = 4. There's no doubt. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
It doesn't require any faith to believe it. That's a mathematical system that we have invented. It requires no faith and there's no doubt. Love, there's doubt. You can, if you say to me, prove that your wife loves you, I can give you a lot of evidence, but I cannot prove it to you. And therefore, but that is how love is. Love and faith are very similar in that sense. You can't even prove that love exists. If you say, prove to me that love exists, how can you prove it? But it does exist. We know it exists. But if you were very cynical, you could say, no, it's not real. It's all to do with various chemicals in your body. It's not really love. It's just, and you can say that, but I'd say nonsense. We know it exists. We believe it exists. but it's open to doubt. You cannot prove love, and you cannot prove faith. So it's always open to doubt. They're like two sides of the same coin.
So how do you hold on to faith? Faith in love, or faith in Christ, faith in, whatever it might be. How do you hold on to that faith?
Well, faith doesn't mean that there's no evidence. I mean, since you're both lawyers, take a jury trial. When you present the evidence to a jury and ask them to, if you're prosecuting a case, for example, and you present the case to the jury, you give them evidence, and they then they come to a conclusion. They come back and they say, if they come back and say guilty, that's a step of faith. They do not know, they cannot know whether that's true or not. You're presenting them with evidence, and they're taking a step of faith based on the evidence. Now, it's not an unreasonable thing for them to do, because they've considered the evidence and they've come to a conclusion. But they could be wrong. It's possible they made a mistake. It's open to doubt, but it's not an unreasonable thing to do. And faith is the same. Faith in Jesus Christ is not unreasonable. There's good evidence for his life, death, and resurrection. And you have to study. It's very like the evidence that the jury considers. It's not scientific evidence. It's not mathematical evidence. It's historical evidence. It's things that happened in the past. That's what you present to a jury. You present them with events that happened in the past. You bring forward witnesses, and you say, therefore, here's the conclusion. Same with faith in Jesus. We have these accounts in the New Testament. That's what I read. The accounts about Jesus in the New Testament. That's evidence. And then you have to say, do I believe this or not? Do I believe these witnesses, or do I think they're lying? Do I think they've made it up? I think that the evidence is very good. I think it's good enough to put my faith in Jesus. But that's a decision everyone has to take. That is a step of faith. It's not a leap of faith. It's not like you jump off a cliff and hope you're going to be okay. It's like a jury decision. You listen, you look at the evidence, and you take a reasonable step of faith.
Okay. So this actually brings me to my next favorite devotional, or one that really stuck to me, was you had one where you talked about and I cannot remember his name, excuse me, but you had a criminal that you reached with your Alpha program. So the Alpha program is that first step to faith for a lot of people who've never been introduced to Jesus, including prisoners. And for me, prison reform is desperately needed throughout the world, especially here in the United States. And you have this program that has reached all of these prisoners. And you spoke about one particular violent prisoner. I actually looked him up after I listened to the Bible in a Year, this particular devotional, and now I can't remember his name. But tell us about that, and tell us about the Alpha program and how it's reached these prisoners and what it's done in their lives, and how you've gotten them to take that one step.
So Alpha is, I guess it's a presentation of the evidence for Jesus. It's an opportunity for people outside the church, people who are like me. That's what I want to try and help people who are like me, who are not Christians, atheists, agnostics, who want to explore, who want to look at the evidence, who are open to, is there a purpose in life? What's the point of my life? What happens when I die? What about forgiveness? Alpha is a way in which people outside the church can explore faith, but it's very low key, non-threatening, non-confrontational, basically. So it's people, they come for a meal. Now you do it online, so it's slightly different, but basically it's a talk and a discussion with people like you, who are people like them, who are agnostics, atheists, people outside the church, exploring faith together. And it started in our church, and we found hundreds of people coming. We have, on the current course, which is the first one online, we have 1,600 guests just on our own course. There are thousands of courses across the UK and all around. There are thousands of churches in America running it. So this is a way to explore faith. And so many people have done it now. Way over 20 million people have done the course. And they tell their friends about it, and other people do the course. And then we heard it was running in a prison, and we sort of laughed. We thought, that's hilarious, Alpha running in a prison. But actually, what I've discovered, and now I've visited so many prisons, both in the UK and in the USA and in Africa, all over the world, is that there's no group of people more open to faith than people in prison. And of course, Jesus spent his time not with the Pharisees, who were very upright and religious, but with the tax collectors and sinners. And they were the ones who were really open to him. And that's what we've found in the prisons, that the people most open to the gospel in the world, we have found, are the Chinese and the people in prison.
No kidding.
That's interesting. So the people in prisons actually make sense to me. I mean, I've in my former life as an attorney, I had several times where I've dealt with people that were either just in prison or going to prison. It gives people it's a life-changing situation, and they have a lot of time on their hands to think about things, and so it makes sense to me. But the Chinese, that stands out as it stands out as unusual that the Chinese would be very receptive.
People in prison are so open, and in the discussion groups, when we do a discussion group, it takes like 10 weeks for people to really open up about what's going on in their lives. In prison, they open up the first night. They just talk. They all that sort of pretense has gone, and they're very open about their real struggles. The Chinese, I think it's because of years of communism and atheism. They are spiritually so hungry, and what we found in China is. So it's like there are 15 sessions over 10 weeks, including a weekend. Usually people, like on the group that are doing online at the moment, most of the people, we've just had our kind of weekend, and most of the people in the groups had an experience of God's love on Saturday when we did our a shortened weekend. But that was after 7 weeks. In China, it's usually after week 1 or week 2. They're just so open and so receptive. And it's an extraordinary thing. Nowhere else in the world have we experienced that, except in the prisons and in China. So there's a spiritual hunger in both places for totally different reasons.
Wow, that's amazing. And so if somebody wanted, let's just say somebody's watching now, feels like they don't know enough about Christ or has never been a faithful person. I have a lot of people who are around me that are hardcore atheists, and they lean on, science or what have you as an excuse. And I don't know if that's a really fair to say as an excuse, but that's where their head's at. And so what could somebody like me who gets questions on a regular basis from people say to them? Can I send them to the Alpha website? Yeah. How much does it cost?
Alpha is free. It's free everywhere in the world. That's the one thing we insist, that any church can run Alpha, and there are thousands of churches in the US and thousands of churches it's in every country in the world. But the only thing, one of the things we really insist on is no one is charged to hear the good news about Jesus. That's free. So there's no charge for doing the Alpha course. Anywhere in the world, and it's alpha.org. I think if you go to alpha.org, there'll be all the information about. Or just Google Alpha. That'll tell you. There are various websites. There's Alpha USA if you're in the United States, and they will direct you to a course, and it runs in all parts of the church: Catholic, Presbyterian, Salvation Army, Baptist, every part of the church runs it. There's no part of no denominational church that isn't running it somewhere.
Well, it's funny because I'm actually a practicing Catholic, and
okay.
I belong to a church here, and then I also volunteer for another Catholic-based food pantry, and okay. I don't think either organization runs Alpha. And when coronavirus is over, or settled down, I guess it's never going to be completely over, right? But when it's settled down, I'm going to look into seeing how we can start the program in our own church, because I think it's so important. And we also have a Get on the Bus program where children go to visit their parents in prison, children who have imprisoned parents, and and we can probably incorporate that together. So
yeah,
I'm going
fantastic.
to.
Well, there's a whole organization in North America called Divine Renovation, which is run by a Catholic priest that is helping Catholic churches that want to run Alpha, how to run it, particularly in a Catholic context.
Mm-hmm.
So Father James Mallon is the Catholic priest, Divine Renovation, and he will help your priest if your priest would like help in getting it going in the parish. He would be able to help.
I would love that. So, okay. So now you started off, I'm going backwards now a little bit. You started being a priest, and I know Alpha was started prior to your involvement, but you really took it and brought it to a new level. And how hard was that? Considering it's a free program, how did you run it? How did you get it to proliferate the way you got it to proliferate?
Well, we didn't set out to do it at all. It's happened by word of mouth. It's what happens is the people who come on the course tell their friends, and they tell their friends, and it snowballs. And then churches hear about, they heard that hundreds of people, I mean, the average age is 27 of the people who come. The vast majority of the guests are aged between 18 and 35. And they just heard that all these people were coming to our church, that hundreds of people were coming. And other churches got interested. So we ran a conference to explain to people how to run it. And I thought that would be the end of it. I thought, I was answering the phone. All these people were ringing me up and saying, how do I run Alpha? And I thought, well, I'll get them all together and that will be it. But then they said, well, would you come to Scotland? Would you come to New Zealand, Australia? We've been to pretty well every country in the world. And then every state in the US.
Reverend Gumbel, that all costs money. How did you do it?
Well, we said we're not going to charge the guests for Alpha.
Okay.
But what we said was to people, there were people outside, people who were philanthropists, people who had, and so what we did eventually when it became, because when businesses are successful, they make money. When this is successful, the more it spreads, the more it costs. So it reached a certain point where our church couldn't pay for it anymore. So we had a dinner and we invited people who we knew had been sort of successful in business. And we said to them, would you like to help with this? Would you like to be our partners? Because, when Jesus, there's a story in Luke chapter 5 where Jesus says to Peter and the other fishermen, cast the nets into the fish that side, and they catch so many fish they just can't cope, so they signal to their partners to come and help them. And we felt like that. We had all these fish, but we just couldn't cope with them, so we signaled to our partners, and partners have been other churches, but also there've been people, donors, and we said to them, and at the end of the evening people came up to us and said, thank you so much. They said, thank you for giving us the opportunity. We're really busy in work. We can't actually run an Alpha course, but you've given us a way in which we can be involved in this. And I realized actually, everyone has a part to play. Some people can invite their friends, some people can run the course, but other people can pay so that other people have the opportunity to do it for free. So that's how it's been funded for the last, whatever it is, 20, probably that was about 25 years in. 25 years ago that started. And it has, the more it grows, the more we need to raise to make it possible. But it's amazing, and people have given, and I never worry about the money because I know that that is not about that, and that God will provide for it. And what I just see, Pippa and I always sit in a small group. I used to do all the talks, but now there's a film series. But Pippa and I always sit in a small group. So this is our 90th small group in a row, the first online. And by the way, it works online better than in person. That's what really amazes me.
Really?
Yeah, it really works online even better than in person. And I think this has so surprised me in the last 7 weeks.
This is something that Jillian and I have talked about a lot, actually, is about the sort of intangible benefits that might come from what's going on with the coronavirus situation. In fact, we just released a book of people writing about their experiences and how they're dealing with the quarantine. And now I'm thinking we should have asked you to write a chapter in that book. We should have, because he's actually speaking truth right now, and it's similar to what one of the people in that book wrote, who's a pastor at a church on a Native American reservation, and what you're saying is actually almost exactly what he said. That it's been amazing how many more people he's been able to reach out to since he's taken his services online.
Oh yeah, our service.
People are hungry for this, especially right now, because people are worried. In a way, I think all the uncertainty kind of simulates, like being in prison in a way. You know, we feel trapped and we have more time to think about stuff.
It is like prison. Being locked down is like being in prison.
Yeah.
But on our course, and we get a lot of people. We run it 3 times a year. We get a lot of people. We would normally have, summer term is less. Normally we get about 500 people, but we have got we've already got over 1,600. So now we don't have to wait. We're starting 2 new courses every week, Wednesday morning, Wednesday evening. We've had over 1,600 guests, and we divide it into small groups. In our small group, all but one would not have come but for the coronavirus. They say, I've got more time. I'm thinking about the big questions, or I couldn't come if it wasn't online, because I've got there's a mother with a 2-year-old and a 3-month-old. They couldn't come unless it had been online. Then they're much more, they connect much faster. Do you know, Zoom or these kind of things help, because we can see, it's Gillian and Jeffrey, you can look here on the box. They can say, oh, Daniel, Chris, as Chris was saying, there's an immediate connection. And which is what really amazes me, people are much more open online. It's a bit like the prisons. They're really open the first week. But for some reason, when you're online, people are in their own home. They don't have to go, we got 2 Muslims in the group. It might be hard for them. You know, if a Muslim wants to explore faith, Christianity, that's a hard thing to do. But you don't have to walk into a church. You can just do it in the comfort of your own home. And it's a bit more anonymous. And then you have this thing that people open up. They say, you know, I'm struggling with drugs, or it's obvious there's one of them guy had a big spliff in his mouth, so it was very obvious. But,
we're sound biting that, like right there.
But it's you know, that's great, isn't it? They can just be themselves. And but the point is that it's a really online has huge advantages. We have a marriage course, you know, which we run, which is not for people whose marriages are in trouble. You know, Pippa and I have just done it. It's a 7-week course. We would normally get, so that also runs all over the world and all over the country. But in our own church, we would normally have 70 to 80 couples. Right now, we have 6,200 couples doing it.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, how did that happen? Well, they have just produced a new version of it that has been brilliantly filmed. So it's a fantastic course, a 7-week course. It looks at communication, conflict, sex, forgiveness, love language, you know, just all these subjects over 7 weeks. It's phenomenal. We finished it last night. Pippa and I finished it, but we would not have been able to do that because when it was running in the church, it ran 7 Mondays. I do not have 7 Mondays in a row that are free ever. I always have meetings. I always have things. But now online, we can choose when we do it. Sometimes we do it. You know, we do it. We don't do it on a Monday necessarily. We do it whenever we can. And so I think they're just huge. In a way, of course, it's a terrible thing, COVID-19. And I don't believe God sent it for a moment. It's part of living in a broken world. But, you know, God took the greatest tragedy in human history, the cross, and turned it into the greatest triumph. And God can use these things for good. And he probably uses them in millions of different ways. But one of the ways he's using it is he's got people's attention. And people are, the number of people attending service on our online services are, you know, HTB at home. We just do it from our home on a camera. We don't know how to do it. We just put a phone and film it. But the number of people, I mean, we have a congregation of about 8,500, but about 4,000 average attendance on Sunday. But now I don't know how many we had. I think one of our services, it looked like we had about 25,000 people joining the service. You think,
wow,
what has happened? Where do all these people come from? And I just saw a survey today that there's a huge number of people, particularly interestingly in the age group 18 to 35, that are exploring services online, and more men than women, which is fascinating. More in that age group than any other age group, and 1 in 5 have never been to church in their life, and they're watching these services online. So something extraordinary is happening at this time. And there's a book called The Rise of Christianity. I don't know whether you know it. I've just been reading it. This is the book. It's called The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark, who is a professor of sociology and comparative religion in the University of Washington. And in the history of Christianity, he gives the reasons why Christianity grew so fast. And one of the reasons was the pandemics. In the pandemic of 165 AD and I think 261, I may have got the date wrong, but it's 2nd century and 3rd century. In the pandemics, the church exploded. And the reason was the pagans ran away and the Christians ran towards it. So it was the Christians who dealt with the needs. And that's what's happening, certainly in the UK right now. It's the churches that are feeding the hungry people. In fact, the councils, the local councils, are having to go to the churches. There is no other infrastructure by which they can get help to the people than through the churches. So the churches are, I mean, we have fed our little thing, we've set up something called Love Your Neighbor, but just from our church and the churches that we planted, we have provided 400,000 meals since lockdown. And there are 1.5 million people in the UK who have gone more than a day without food because they can't afford it. And we are absolutely determined to get to those 1.5 million people and provide them with food, because that's what the church does. It meets spiritual hunger, yes, but it also meets physical hunger. And you can't divorce the two. They're both needs that people have. But the church, so I'm so interested. I think we're going to see an explosion in faith, because just like the pandemics of the 2nd and 3rd century, it's the church who are like the 5th emergency service. They're the ones who are going out and reaching the people.
Right. No, and I think that's so important that you talked about. You can't divide or separate spiritual hunger and actual physical hunger. I think, a lot of people are forgetting that right now, when it's a little sensitive to say, like, oh, stay home, don't work. And I know that we shouldn't be out, being together at this time. So we got to find solutions for people to make sure that they do have food on the table. But, I also want to talk about spiritual hunger from the sense of, again, somebody who might not be ready to take that action and go on Alpha. If you were going to recommend one Bible passage for somebody to read who might be watching this, might be lost, might not know where to start, what would that Bible passage be?
I think I would read something from John's Gospel. If you read John chapter 10, that's got the verse where Jesus says, I came that you might have life, and life in all its fullness. That's what I discovered. I thought that becoming a Christian would mean the end of life, end of the enjoyment of life. I did it because I read the New Testament. I thought, this is true. Jesus really did rise from the dead. This really is the truth. Initially I thought I'll put it off to my deathbed so I can enjoy my life and then become a Christian. But then I thought, there's no integrity about that. Never mind. I'll just have to do it, and then I'll be miserable for the rest of my life. But it's true, so I've got to do it. And I found it was exactly the opposite. It was in a relationship with God through Jesus, you find life in all its full. Not an easy life. If you want an easy life, don't be a Christian. But if you want an exciting life, and a full life, then there's no better way than following Jesus. It was never easy to follow Jesus. The early disciples were crucified or beheaded or put in prison or whatever. And it's different today. In many parts of the world, it's not different. But certainly in the USA and in the UK, the worst that'll happen is people will laugh at you. But it's still, there are challenges to being a Christian. But it is the most fulfilling life that you can ever have. And that spiritual hunger that is in every human heart. Why am I here? What's the purpose of life? You can have all the money in the world and still be completely empty. You can have all the success and fame in the world and still be empty. But Jesus said, come to me and I'm the bread of life. I will feed that inner hunger, that spiritual hunger that is in every human heart. Mm-hmm. That can't be satisfied by money or sex or fame or even human relationships. Can only be satisfied by a relationship with God, because that's why we were created.
So if somebody is, okay, so we have the person who is spiritually hungry, John chapter 10. I'm going to read that as soon as we get off of here. But then let's talk to the person who hears what you're saying, is professionally successful and needs to do something more with their life, needs to move in some kind of direction of doing more for their community, coming more towards Christ. What words of wisdom could you offer to them?
I mean, I would encourage anyone to read the New Testament. That's what I did. It's I think if you've never read the New Testament, it ought to be on your bucket list anyway, to read the New Testament. Don't go to your grave without having read the New Testament. I mean, at the very least, the Bible is the most popular book in the world. And more copies of if in the New York Times bestseller list, they put the Bible, it would be top every week. That's why they don't put it there. It would be so boring, wouldn't it? Every week. Oh, it's the Bible. It is the #1 bestseller in the world every week. Why would you not read the #1 bestseller in the world? Why not? That's why I did this thing on the Bible in 1 year. That takes you through the whole Bible in 1 year. But if you haven't got time to do that, just read the New Testament.
Oh, please. People have time to do that. That's nonsense. You just have to make the time, because it's no more than, I don't even think it's a half hour a day.
25 minutes. 25 minutes, yeah.
Exactly. So I literally would, once I got into a routine of walking my dogs and doing it at night, that's how I finished it. I was doing it every morning, first thing I woke up in the morning, but then the mornings got chaotic and I would just forget, and I'd be like, I'll do it later, and I wouldn't do it later. But it truly is, it's 25 minutes a day. And by the time the year's done, or maybe the 3 years are done, like you'll be done with the Bible. And I'm going to do it again, because, I'm 3 years removed from it. I'm going to start it over again. But it becomes quite enjoyable. And I would always hear that pause right before your wife, Pippa, does the very last part of it. And she only does maybe 30 seconds, right? But she would always do something funny, and I would find myself walking in the dark through my neighborhood, just going hee hee hee, laughing at her whatever little joke she just told. So
most people just scroll down to the Pippa ads. If I had a dollar for everyone who said to me, I don't really listen to your thing, but I go to the Pippa ads.
It's so fulfilling. And the thing is about the reason why I'm selling it so hard is because it did so much for me. I had some pretty dark times in my mind. I had some pretty dark times in the last 3 years. And there were so many times that year in the Bible program got me through it. And you putting it together, because there's passages in the Bible that just don't make sense, especially in the Old Testament. And this year in the Bible program, I can't emphasize enough that it would put together those pieces. It would put together the Old Testament.
Just shut this.
No worries. It's fine. My dog's barking in the background. This is the least technically difficult show we've ever had. We usually have lots of problems. Yeah, so hopefully the dogs aren't distracting you guys.
I'm so sorry. Go on, Julie. I'm so sorry. I interrupted you.
No. I really just want to encourage the audience to please download the Gumbel's Bible in a Year, because it is such a fulfilling program, and it will. It's not just about the devotionals being fulfilling, but it ties everything together. And even as a cradle Catholic, grew up in the Catholic Church, I just did not understand the Bible. You could read Exodus and go, why the heck is this happening? Why is this happening? Read or Leviticus and go, why do I have evil Why? Like all of this stuff, or the horribleness that happened in the Old Testament. But if you really think about it, the horribleness that happened in the Old Testament is still happening today. It's just different stuff. Right. So the fact that you then get to read this New Testament and tie it back really helps. And I think it really helps the non-believer, because a lot non-believer reads the Old Testament and goes, why would God let this happen?
Yeah.
You know, or
this is a common thing I hear from some of my atheist friends is like, if there was really a God, he wouldn't let X, Y, and Z happen. Right. And that is, what you were saying at the beginning about how you can't have faith without doubt. That's maybe my biggest doubt point I ever have is when I see suffering and I think this just doesn't make sense. Like, we have an omnipotent creator God that can, do whatever he wants. Why does he let this happen? Like, that's a real hard thing to wrap your head around, especially I think for newer believers. And so I love that, what you were saying about that, by the way. Like, I remember, hearing one of my church services when I was like maybe 13 or 14 years old, where the pastor basically said exactly that if you don't have doubt, then you really don't have faith. Like, if you don't have some doubt, then you're missing the point, right? Like, that's you have to have that. And that's always it's stuck with me for 30 years now, where I'm like, whenever I feel some doubt, I think, well, okay, well, that's good. That means I'm actually thinking about this stuff, right? If I wasn't, it would be a problem. So I loved hearing that from you.
No, actually, I have a 12-year-old who has terrible doubt, and I'm going to show him this video when this is over. I mean,
well, don't show him the part where you tell him you're going to show him the video, or he'll know your secrets.
Yeah, well, no, I'm going to tell him, I'm going to show you this video, because I want you to know that it's okay to have doubt with your faith. Like, he struggled. Like, when he was 6 years old, he went into church. And the priest was telling the gospel that day was the transfiguration, and it was all quiet. Priest ends, it's all nice and quiet. And my 6-year-old yells in the middle of church, "Mom, Jesus is a ghost." He just explained that Jesus is a ghost. Like, he couldn't wrap his head around that. And then when he asked me to explain the story of Easter, I explained it. And he said, "So what you're saying is Jesus is a zombie." So he's always struggled with that. And that's hard for me as a parent, but I think I'm going to show him this video and tell him it's okay to have some doubts. Let's read that New Testament together, buddy. let's figure this out. So, but listen, I could talk to you all day. I could ask you questions all day, but we'll end with this last question. If you don't mind, Jeff, I'm going to ask this. Can you please tell us the best story of turnaround that you've ever experienced?
I think I don't know whether it was the one you were referring to before, but I think of a guy called Shane Taylor. Shane Taylor was he was the 6th most dangerous person in our prison system.
That one, yeah, that's the one.
Because I told his story at a conference one time, and someone from the Home Office was there, and he said, "I know Shane Taylor because we have a list of the most dangerous criminals in our prison system, and he was number 6, and he had done some horrific things, and he was in close security, which is, we have this, it's worse than solitary confinement. You have 2 doors, so because they can't open both, they can't let you anywhere near, they can't open a door, so they have the food goes through a hatch, and then the prisoner can open the door from the other side and take the food. And then when they shut it, then anyway, so it's close, and they only ever open both doors with 6 armed security people there. And he had the reason he was there was because he had assaulted the prison. He had done some terrible things. He'd stabbed a prison officer. He'd also he had done every crime you could imagine. And somehow he got transferred to prison. He got onto an alpha course, and he encountered Jesus, and he said, God. He tells the story. He says, "God, I hate who I am, but I ask you to come into my life and to change me." And he was instantly changed. I mean, it is an extraordinary thing because he was so violent, so feared in the criminal world because he was just crazy. And he turned around so fast that he went from being this most dangerous person in the prison to being like the chapel orderly. And he was released quite not that long. He got his sentence sort of reduced, and because just they saw this total transformation. He came out, and his girlfriend also went on Alpha. She became a Christian, and they now have 5 children. And
Wow.
honestly, he is the most, I mean, he's just the most lovely man. He's the most cuddly, warm guy. He works for us now. He's employed by our organization, Caring for Ex-Offenders. He goes into the prisons. They have huge respect for him because he's really well known. I mean, he's really well known in the criminal world. And they just cannot believe that this guy is the same guy. And the prison officers where he committed that crime, he goes back into that prison. Amazingly, the prison officer, you know, he spoke to he asked the prison officer to forgive him, and the prison officer has forgiven him. And he goes back into that prison, and they want him to go back because he's such a powerful example to every person in prison of how a life can be turned around.
Wow.
He's one. It is the most. And when we look at him, you just cannot believe that this guy is the same person who committed all these horrible, horrible crimes. He's written a book now. It's come out called Shane, which tells his life story, and it's horrific. But I know he's now this gentle giant. I mean, he's massive. You know, he spent his whole life in the gym. He was like absolutely just huge and terrifying. And now he's this cuddly, loving husband, loving father. You know, it's amazing to see it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I looked it up online after I read that. It was such an amazing story when you told it in the Bible in the Year program that I actually looked him up and then looked up his story, but I just could not remember his name for the life of me today.
Shane Taylor. If you Google Shane Taylor, you'll see some of our national newspapers have told the story because it is such an extraordinary story. But honestly, it's one of so many stories I could tell you about people who've been in prison and encountered Jesus and have had their lives transformed. The person who runs Alpha in prison was himself in prison as a young man. We have 50 ex-offenders in our congregation now. And some of the most amazing friends that we've got were people who were in prison, encountered Jesus. The guy who did the biggest ever, up till that time, the biggest ever importation of cannabis into the UK. He is one of a really key leader in our church now. And he was on the very first Alpha course in prison back in 1994. And we've just watched this guy, again, a very well-known criminal. In fact, his whole family were a very well-known criminal family. And here we are 26 years later. Everyone said Michael Emmett will never go straight. He's just so well-known as the criminal world. And yet 26 years later, he's never committed another crime. And he is such a key part of the church. He often helps or leads a group on Alpha. He's remarkable man. It was him and his father who were in Exeter prison, and his father was a really senior person in the criminal world. He was head of the Unlicensed Boxing Association, another very famous criminal. And he and his father both encountered Jesus on the same day on an Alpha, through the Holy Spirit. It's extraordinary to see. And actually, do you know, their friends in the criminal world really respect them, and they respect their faith. They never laughed at them. They used to say to them, "I'm so glad you found the Lord." It's really interesting, so interesting. You would expect the criminal world to have a different attitude, but it really, going into the prisons has made me realize why Jesus loved to spend his time with tax collectors and sinners, because there's a humility there and an openness, because they realize they need Jesus, whereas sometimes we don't realize in the same way that they do.
That's fantastic. Jeff, any parting words? I don't want to keep Reverend Gumbel all day.
No. So I do note one thing, and that is I need to step up my bookshelf game, because your bookshelves are amazing. and people are always like, wow, you have a lot of books behind you. Because like I used to do this in studio, but now we don't get out of the house. So I'm like in my basement, and I just got like random piles of books. And then I see your background, and I'm like, if that's fake, I want to get that Zoom backdrop and put it out for myself. But assuming it's real, it's impressive.
No, it's not. I don't know what to do with all my books. I'm completely at a loss. I think everyone who writes a book sends me a copy now. So
and we're going to be sending you a copy too. You're going to love.
I can send about at least 10 books every week. I don't know. And they're just piled up. I can't even get them on the bookshelves. I'm gonna have to have double.
We'll send you a digital copy of ours. we'll save you the space. But thank you, Reverend.
I like books. It's good insulation too. It keeps the room cool in winter, cool in summer.
Right, and if you get into a real pinch, you always have firewood. So they're right? So, maybe not the most efficient use of books, but listen, I really appreciate you coming on, and fascinating stuff. I'm probably going to end up rewatching the show myself, which is something I've never done before. So, because I'm sure I missed something in there. But anyway, so thank you very much for coming on. If people want to reach out, the best places to go to alpha.org. Is that right?
Yeah, alpha.org is, or if they want to see more about like our online, if they're online, is HTB is the name of the church. HTB. If you just Google HTB church or whatever.
Okay.
Alpha.org.
It's Holy Trinity Brompton. That's what the HTB.
Yeah, exactly. Holy Trinity Brompton. That's the church, and Alpha is the course. But the course is more relevant if you're in the US, because you can, there are courses running in Catholic churches across the US, and Presbyterian, Lutheran, Baptist, Salvation Army, every Methodist, every church every type of church in the US runs Alpha somewhere.
That's great.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Jillian, you want to take us out?
I will. Bye, everyone. I'm Jillian.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be with you. Such fun. A lot of laughter.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.